Good evening, everyone. CSMBS welcomes you all for another interesting talk on the importance and challenges of institutional archives. This talk is in collaboration with the Godrej Archives and is supported by the TCS Foundation. This evening, we have with us Ms. Vrunda Pathare, who will be talking to us about shaping institutional history through its archives and challenges with her experience in setting up the Godrej Archive. Ms. Pathare heads the Godrej Archives, a business archives of Godrej Group. She is trained from the National Archives of India and started her career as a research assistant to late Dr. Sadashiv Gorakshikar, former director of CSMVS. Ms. Patare's contribution towards archiving is not just limited to Godrej Archives, as she has collaborated with various other institutions like ONGC and TIFR. She also holds important positions as Secretary of Section of Business Archive of International Council of Archives and of the Oral History Association of India. She is a member of the steering committee for the Dr. Avabai Wadia and Dr. Bomanji Karshetji Wadia Archives for Women. She is also on the Board of Studies for the Department of History of colleges like Ramnaran Ruya College, Guru Nanak Khalsa College, Jai Hind College, and SNDT Women's University. In the past, she has also served as a member of the advisory board of Raj Bhavan Archives of Government of Maharashtra and as a member of the IMA Archive Committee. Ms. Pathare has several publications and has also authored a monograph titled Arthur Bedford Orlebar, Founders and Guardians of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, published in 2018 as a part of the Asiatic Society monograph series. Before we begin the talk, I request the audience to note down your questions in the chat box that will be addressed by the speaker at the end of the talk. With this brief introduction, I now request Ms. Pathare to begin the talk.
Thank you, Shannon, for that generous introduction. And I would first of all like to thank CSMVS for inviting me to speak today. And it's really my pleasure because we have completed 15 years as Godrej Archives. And it is a great opportunity to recap those memories of setting up the Godrej Archive. And I must say that, my entry into this field of archiving was in a way responsible because of the museum, because I was working with former director of CSMVS, Sadashiv Gorakshikar. And it was really accidental because I was actually preparing for civil services and I never had any intention of becoming an archivist. And while doing that, I was approached by one of my professor at Ruya College, and she mentioned that Mr. Gorakshikar is looking for a research assistant for his book project on Raj Bhavans in Maharashtra. And, would you be interested? And I thought, why not, just experience this research field. And I thought that, I should take this opportunity so that I can, learn a lot of things from him. So I just happened to become the research assistant to him on this project, and then there was no looking back. He kept insisting that he used to tell me that Vrunda, there are not many archives around, there are not many private institutions who are setting up the archives. This field is really worth exploring, and if you have interest, you should actually get into this and try and see what are your likings. So that's I think so in a way my entry into the archiving world is because of him, and I would like to dedicate this lecture to him. Let me now share my screen. I hope everyone can see the screen.
Yeah, it's good, ma'am.
Yes, yeah. So as I was telling you about Mr. Gorakshikar, my first project of institutional history actually began with him when he was authoring the book on Raj Bhavans in Maharashtra. And when we actually started researching for this, we obviously had to go to Maharashtra State Archives, which is an amazing, archives as far as the city of Mumbai's history is concerned, and also of the Bombay Presidency is concerned. And it is very rich and valuable resource, which is there preserved at the Elphinstone College. And when we were actually trying to tap the history of, there were like 4 Raj Bhavans in Maharashtra, and we wanted to capture, the history of the architecture, history of the institution, that is the government house and the governor's office. So it was really like, amazing experience going through these documents, because that was my first introduction to the archives. I had never been to the archives, even though I was trained as a historian, and my post-graduation was in history, but I had never really tackled the primary resources. So that was my first introduction. And, it was really interesting to go through the list of the departments, list of records of various departments in Maharashtra State Archives. They have a lovely guidebook to go through, which actually gives you an overview of the collection that they have. And then when we started researching for the material on government houses, we really found amazing collection over there. And as you can see on the screen, there is this wonderful map, because recently, I think you all must have heard about the discovery of bunkers at Raj Bhavan. And in fact, when we were researching on Raj Bhavan book way back in 2001, we had actually found this drawing that was made in 1875. And this was basically the drawing which spoke about a lot of renovations that were being carried out at the government house at Malabar Point, and in anticipation of the visit of Prince of Wales in 1875. And there were like a lot of drawings from 1868 talking about these kind of renovations being done. And in this, one of the drawings that we have published in the book actually showed this bunker kind of a thing. And we were wondering then that, where exactly this is, because we couldn't see that on the campus at Raj Bhavan. And we kept asking the Raj Bhavan staff, and they said there is a bunker, but now there is a wall constructed, so you can't really enter into that. And that's why we actually lost the opportunity. And when we heard that, that is being opened in 2018 or 2019, we actually visited there, and Mr. Gorakshakar was around that time. And we actually, this is actually the picture taken in that bunker. So it was really amazing to see that what we had seen in the records, we could actually witness that, how it was. But then, when we were researching for the book, we realized that if we want to research for the period after independence, we are not really able to find the records at the state archives, because not lot many government departments had sent their records post-independence. So earlier, during the British period, it was a practice to send the records after certain years to the state archives or the national archives. But unfortunately, post-independence, this kind of a practice has not been rigorously followed. And therefore, it is really very difficult for a historian of a contemporary period to search for these kind of records. And, then we actually tried asking the Raj Bhavan officers if they have any records, and they actually showed, their record room. We started going through these records. And at that time, we actually told them that why not, you set up the archives of your own collection that you have, because we were interested in knowing about the creation of Maharashtra. And in those documents, we actually even found the flag that was used on the governor's car, which was quite an amazing discovery for us. Or even this photographs that you see here on the right is actually the King Thiba from the Myanmar. And he was actually in the house arrest since 1910 from the British period. And we actually found these pictures, his correspondence with the governor. He was asking for, increase in his compensation payments. So these were like really amazing stories that were, coming from. And in Ratnagiri, you can still go and see the house where he was kept. It's called as Thiba's Palace. So these are the fragments of histories which were like little unknown. And these are lying in these kind of institutions. Unfortunately, post-independence, not lot many institutions are consciously preserving these kind of records. And therefore, we are actually, already experiencing a little amnesia when it comes to the contemporary history of India. And we also experienced the same thing on our second project with, again, Mr. Gorakshakar, and where we were actually curating the Museum for Oil and Natural Gas Corporation. When we started asking them around, where we can actually find the records, which, through which we can trace the history of ONGC, its creation, what was the thought process behind it. And we started inquiring. So our first, of course, guess was that there might be few records at the National Archives of India, because this being a ministerial records, it must have been transferred after 25 years to the National Archives. When we reached there, unfortunately, National Archives told us that the ministry has not sent their records to us. And then we thought that let's go to the ministry offices. We started exploring their record room, and their record room was in a good condition. They also had a register. And when we started going through the register, we were really very thrilled to see one file which was titled Birth of ONGC. And we were really excited, and we asked them, whether we can get this file. Unfortunately, they told us that, this is really too old records. So we had already destroyed these old records. And this is really unfortunate when it comes to these institutions now, because sometimes it is the budget constraints, sometimes it is the space constraints, and sometimes it is just the sheer ignorance that we are actually weeding out a lot of records without giving them a due consideration that they can be actually the future sources of history. And that's what actually happened, even at this ministry's record office. So what we, then we started inquiring, and we found out that KD Malviya papers were actually deposited at the Nehru Memorial Library and Museum. So we thought, that let's see, what we can find there. And when we started going through KD Malviya papers, because KD Malviya was the Minister of Ministry of Natural Resources and Scientific Research, as it was called then. So we went through, all those records, and it was really amazing to see that what was the thought process behind ONGC. And he was writing to Nehru, and he was saying that, I want to really propose to, start this oil and natural gas division, as he was calling it then. And because he wanted to really restrict foreign companies who were actually dominating the field of oil exploration. And because, post-independence, we had this whole vision of self-reliance. He also wanted that we should get the self-reliance, and we should have control over all our oil resources. And that's why he thought of, establishing the oil and natural gas division. And we also found his correspondence where he is telling Nehru that, I do not want the offices of ONGC in Delhi, because I want this institute to be a little away from the political scenario, but still it should be close by, and therefore they actually chose Dehradun as their headquarters. And the Tel Bhavan, which is there in Dehradun now, actually houses this museum, which was the first building where the ONGC started. So these are really very important milestones in the history of India. And, if there was no such attempt of, setting up the museum, setting up the archives, these things would have been lost, and not many people would have seen it. Only few historians who might have visited NMML, they might have actually gone through the KD Malviya papers and might have written the research articles. But people would have been, oblivious to this interesting kind of a narrative that India was actually had, started upon post-independence. Similarly, so we actually, we unknowingly, we carry these little pieces of history in our wallets, literally. If you see, rupee 1 note on the left-hand side and rupee 1,000 rupees note that now we are actually using, it has this little ship on it, and which is actually our first offshore rig in India, which was actually not really away from our city. It is in Bombay High, and they started exploring oil in Bombay High. And in 1973, this ship was actually brought in, and we started oil exploration at Bombay High, which is the first offshore rig. And we actually see this on our note, but without realizing that what kind of contribution, this has made to the scientific history, technological history, and history of natural resources for us. And there are these little different kinds of histories that we are still oblivious to. And I think that's something that, should be brought forward, should be preserved consciously. And therefore, institutional archives really become very important. Another institute that I worked with was, and it again has a connection with ONGC as well, because in ONGC, when we were researching, I often came across this name, N.B. Prasad, who was the chairman of ONGC sometime in 70s, if I remember correctly. And when I joined TIFR, that was my first, experience of being an archivist. And in Dr. Indira Chaudhary was setting up the archives over there. And I assisted her in that whole journey of setting up the archives. And N.V. Prasad was actually also part of the Department of Atomic Energy. He was also involved in the reactor program. He was also given responsibility of the Cyrus reactor. And so it was very interesting to know that somebody who had worked at TIFR later goes and becomes, the chairman at Oil and Natural Gas division. And then we, had actually gone through these kind of really interesting facets of scientific history and the history of sciences in India, which was again a fascinating story to tell. And Dr. Indira Chaudhary has already produced the book on Dr. Bhabha and his contribution, and also on the institutional history of TIFR. And how actually these things actually started shaping up, how even the National Balloon Facility came up in Hyderabad. All these little things we actually discovered, as you can see here, the little Excel sheets that we used to maintain for cataloging, that actually started coming up. So all these connections that all these institutions were making with each other were really quite amazing to look at. And they actually tell you about how Indian leadership had a vision for new India in 60s and 70s. And this was another thing that, I got connected with my third, and the current project that I'm working on. And these were actually the louvers which I was seeing when I was working at TIFR. And the TIFR staff, and they always were in praise of this building and the architecture and the louvers and the whole architectural fabrication that was done for these buildings. And then suddenly, somebody told me that, these are manufactured by Godrej, these were fabricated by Godrej. And Mr. Kulkarni, who used to look after the auditorium in TIFR, he also showed us one lock sample that was made for Bhabha, and, so that Bhabha can approve what are the locks that he wanted for this building. And, and I didn't know then that I would be setting up the Godrej Archives eventually. But these were like little pieces that, were connecting with each other, were actually the weaving the fabric of what India was, post-independence, and what was the Indian narrative post-independence. So this was an amazing thing. And when I came to Godrej, we actually found this picture where you can see Naval Godrej and Sunuben Godrej with Pandit Nehru at the inauguration of the TIFR building in 1960s. So this is something that I always thought, that there are like different institutions, say for example in Mumbai, which are now actually coming up, and these institutional archives are really very important, because this is a kind of a shared history. Every institute is connected with each other. So may it be, so for some records, you have to go to the government archives and the state archives. If you're dealing with the period, the British period, you will find the mind-boggling kind of an information on that. And now we, of course, have 3 corporate archives in Mumbai, not the Tatas, of course, Tatas are in Pune, but Godrej and Bajaj are in Mumbai now. We have wonderful TIFR archives dealing with the science history. We have Aquath Leprosy Museum and archives dealing with the leprosy history and the medicinal history. There are women's archives now in Mumbai. We also have like a lot of documentaries at Films Division, which have captured these kind of institution building that took place in 60s and 70s. And their documentaries are a wonderful resource to understand this kind of a development and the whole industrialization that took place. So everything is really like a kind of a connected, narrative. And therefore, I think if we start archiving individual institutions, we can actually get an amazing history of the community we belong to, of the society we belong to, and the nation we represent. And it can actually give us a distinct identity, how actually the conversations of these institutions were happening, how these were connected with each other. And it would be a really fascinating story to tell. But for that, we must understand that why memories are really very important. And this reminds me of a film that I had seen, and you must have seen also, The Lunchbox, where Irfan Khan had played a character called Sajan. And, he says in one of the scenes that I think we forget things if we have no one to tell them to. So unless and until stories are told, we are not going to really remember them. And therefore, remembering is often like related to the communication. Unless and until you preserve them, unless and until you communicate them, these narratives are going to be lost to time. And then we might, everyone might experience the amnesia. And what happens when we are experiencing the amnesia is what, we will lose our identity. And therefore, you will see nowadays, that Facebook, Instagram, and I often see it as a memory tool. Of course, we can debate about it, but then these are like memory tools. This is a basic need of a human being to preserve memories. And once you get these kind of platforms, you are actually voluntarily giving access to your personal memoirs, to your personal archives. And so then remembering becomes kind of a social behavior through this social media. And people are collectively curating their shared memories, and they are voluntarily sharing these. And therefore, it is really very interesting to see that, memory is a basic need. And therefore, so for individuals, it is really very necessary because it is often connected with our identity. Because, one fine day, if we wake up and if we are like losing our memory, you can imagine what stress that we will go through, because we will just lose our identity. We don't know who we are. And that's precisely what we find in our Indian philosophical discourses as well. And, here I can actually refer to Bhagavad Gita as one of the shlokas, and where Krishna is saying that loss of memory leads to the destruction of intelligence, and from the destruction of intelligence, he perishes. So here, actually, a lot of our Indian philosophical discourses have connected memory with knowledge as well. And once you know about yourself, it actually helps you create your distinct identity as well. And this, we are talking about individual memories, internalizing memories. But if we want to externalize these memories, we have to think about how then organizations and institutions really choose to remember. And that's when I think the memory houses such as archives or museums comes into play. And they are basically a structured kind of a way, the institutional form of preserving the memory. And with that need, actually, the whole concepts of archives and museums came into play, which is basically our protest against forgetting. We do not want to forget anything. We want to remember certain things. And as Vikram Seth might have said that, we try and accumulate material for our future nostalgia. We need that. This is our need. And therefore, archives become site that serve to constitute the collective memory. These are all our collective memories that give us an identity as a society as well. However, if you see, till now in India, most of the archiving as a concept was only restricted to the public records. So we have a lot of acts in place like this one, the Public Records Act of 1993. We also have record rules for the state of Maharashtra of 1997, whereby there are like all the guidelines are laid down for a lot of government organizations that how they should be preserving their records. And there is a proper process that after 25 years, they have to survey their records, they have to assess these records, and then they have to actually categorize them into different categories. And then those which are categorized as A and B are for the permanent upkeep, and then they are to be sent to the state archives or the national archives as per these guidelines. However, when it comes to the private institutions, there is no such law, except for like businesses or the financial institutions, which are guided by the income tax and the company act. They have certain kind of rules for, how many period the records are to be kept. But after that, for example, I think the 7 years and 10 years is the maximum. After that, they can weed out the records. And then at the time of weeding out, there is no, again, conscious selection of these records. And therefore, not many institutions are really keeping a lot of records that can actually, talk about their history. And therefore, again, I would like to refer to one of the quote of Mr. Gorakshakar, who in his keynote address at the International Conference on Archives and Museum on Leprosy had said that every organization, howsoever technical, also has another side, which is the thought process, and how this thought process has to be captured. And it is like, over the period of time, there are a lot of records that are accumulated in these organizations are the basic tools to have an empathetic understanding of the past. And that's what he always, advocated, that a lot of institutions should now come forward. Of course, now the things are changing, and he was speaking almost many years back, but now, thankfully, a lot of institutions have realized this, and now a lot of many institutional archives are being set up. But then, what really were the reasons for this loss of memory that so far that we had experienced? One, there is definitely an indifference on part of many institutions for the upkeep of records. Again, there are budget constraints, and one cannot deny that you need space, especially in the cities like Mumbai, to make way for the new records. There are a lot of budgetary constraints because keeping the records in a paper format or a digital format is not a very less expensive thing. Then there are a lot of changing of the technology. So a lot of people, earlier used to save it on, say, floppies, on CDs. Now we don't get the CD drives, even with our laptops. Floppies are, of course, are quite ancient now as far as the technology is concerned. There is a constant change in technology that happens, and then there is no such procedure whereby we can actually keep track of whatever the formats that have changed over a period of time, and to trace those kind of records. For example, VHS tapes. Nowadays we don't even get the video players. So how we are going to really read this material that is now non-existent, and therefore this becomes really a problem. And then there are, of course, the problems of the digital world, because the digital world is, I think, it's more problematic, I would say, because a lot of things are now happening on emails. There was a generation which used to print out the emails and file it. But now everything is digital, and there is no process, there is no procedure at different companies, different institutions, whereby you can actually archive these emails in the archival sense, not in the IT archive sense. But there is no conscious attempt for any organization. So there would be a digital dark age if we are not really addressing these issues. And then, of course, there are also changes in the organization. Sometimes the institutions get closed, sometimes the institutions collaborate, merge with something else, and then you just don't find any records. So now I will tell you how actually we tried to deal with amnesia and how we tried to set up the archives at Godrej. And I'll be drawing upon that experience to tell you what can be done, what are the challenges while setting up such kind of an archives. So Godrej Archives was, the idea was mooted by Saurabh Godrej, who was the then chairman of Godrej Group of Industries. And in 1997, company was celebrating 100 years. Godrej and Boyce Manufacturing Company Limited started in 1897. And obviously 1997, they were planning for the centenary. So in 1995, the planning for the centenary celebration started, in which Saurabh Godrej thought that, this is the right time to look back upon and to try and see, and learn from whatever the past and what the Godrej had done so far. And he, in a very interesting note that he wrote on 19 December 1995 to the Centenary Committee that was formed, and he said that, we need the archives, which can be a heritage center offering valuable archival material for reference and research. And he also laid down the objectives for the archives, and he wanted people to understand the company's ethos, company's growth, how it has evolved over a period of time. He also wanted to also wanted to appreciate the quality of the men and, how people have contributed to the success of this company. And he also wanted to trace the company's values to that of the founder's vision. So he had already a vision for the archives, and which I must say actually really helped us when we actually formally started in 2006. Because a lot of institutions, even though they set up the archives, they are not making it available for reference, or they are not giving access to people. But here, there was a chairman of the business group who was saying that it has to be offered for the reference and research. And that actually really, helped us a lot, and it solved a lot of our issues when we started formally, because there was already a diktat available that we have to make it open, we have to make it accessible. And what they did was very interesting in that year when I wasn't, of course, around. But in 1996 and 95, they actually published an ad making an appeal to people, saying that if they have anything on Godrej, they can just come and share with us. And interestingly, this got a huge response, and a lot of documents started flooded in. Saurabh Godrej himself actually collected a lot of documents from the family and his own house, and it was an amazing collection. So a lot of customers started writing to the Centenary Committee saying that we have an old safe, and one of the old safes that we now have in collection actually came during that period, which was bought in 1914. And that person had also preserved the receipt of that safe, which was signed by Ardeshir Godrej. So these were actually, the customers who had really were devoted to Godrej. They actually started responding, and this collection actually was really an amazing collection, which we today call it as a Centenary Collection. And here also you can see some of the pieces from that. The first drawing that you see here was something that we submitted for the first patent, for along with the application that we made for securing the patent. And in 1908 and 1909, Godrej got the first patent for the springless lock. So these are the designs submitted by Firod Shah Godrej for the springless lock. Then we also have some of the handwritten notes of the founder, where he's talking about how to make safe a burglar-proof safe. And then we also have a Central Bank of India. Now, how other institutions also are really very important, and their history also matters for a larger narrative, is this example is, I think, worth telling, because the Central Bank of India moved to their headquarters that we currently see in around the fort area near the fountain. And this Central Bank of India building came up in 1911, and they published one little brochure saying that we have moved to this new building. And there were little photographs in which we found this photograph of their cash counter, which were having Godrej safes below. And that's actually, quite an interesting narrative, therefore, that how these banking institutions and the supplier of safe have these kind of, relationships. And then, of course, we have only interview that Ardeshir ever gave to the press. And he speak about self-reliance, why there is a need to, manufacture in India, how we should actually increase our manufacturing capabilities. So those vision and those values which Godrej is still carrying out, we could actually see it in this collection. And then, of course, we also got a lot of documents related to how the township in Vikhroli came about. So this was the Centenary Collection that we got. So when in the year 2006, we started as a formal department in Godrej, we realized that we need to first focus on this collection alone, which was quite a small collection to handle, which was just 8,000 photographs and 6,000 documents. And we actually started going through this. We just had one small office, and we had just few cupboards to keep these documents. So there is actually, archivists shouldn't feel discouraged because, eventually the infrastructure will be built up. And you can actually also manage with whatever the little resources you are. You just have to be creative enough and just see to it that these records are preserved and documented carefully. So we were using ordinary boxes then, because the budgets had to be, still figured out. There was no acid-free albums, and acid-free folders would have been really very expensive. So we, tried with our handmade papers. We tried with the normal, paper that we could get. We tried, but we actually started this process because we realized that we have to come up with all the processes. Let's use this collection to think about the policy, to think about all the procedures that we are going to follow. And we actually prepared the manual of our archival practices and procedures in that first 2 years, because we thought, without that, I think we shouldn't be like even going ahead with, because this is something that we really need to establish the processes first, so that, taking records from the businesses, and then again documenting it, cataloging it, arranging it would be then simplified for everyone. So whoever the team comes and joins, they should be aware of what are the processes to be followed, because there are no standards available easily for the institutional kind of an archives. And then we, of course, also thought, besides arranging this collection that was already preserved, we also thought that let's now try to see where the records can be. How can we actually try and identify sources of records for the business history of Godrej? And then somebody, we started chatting with business heads, we started chatting with all the workers, employees, whoever we come across. We started capturing their memories, we started talking to them. And one fine day, somebody called us from Lal Bagh and said, kuch to Lal Bagh mein hai, there are a lot of files and there are a lot of cupboards lying there, just go and see that. So we went there and, they had emptied the cupboard and kept all the files in one of the factory shed. And when we saw that, huge pile of records, we were like, it was really mind boggling, because we had to really go through each and every file. And it took us 3 months to go through every record there. But it was really a worth journey for us, because we found amazing collection that covered the period from 40s to 80s, which was otherwise missing as far as the records were concerned. And the blueprint that you see here is one of our favorite file, which is called as a garden department file. And this actually talks about the whole development of Vikhroli township. And this blueprint actually has shown not just the plans where they will be constructed, but they had actually shown the line of Ashoka trees that is to be planted in the Vikhroli township. And it is an amazing record. There were like a lot of correspondence with the gardener, and Mr. Vinod was handling the garden department. He's writing that how the lawns are to be laid in front of every plant. And it's an amazing kind of a thing that we received. And other things that we got from this kind of a collection was a lot of circulars that were issued by our sales and marketing team, which had offices in Lal Bagh till 70s. And one of the important circular that you can see on the left had just one line. And it just said that now whatever we will be sending to Karachi, it should carry a Made in India label. And this is a very simple line, but then this actually spoke about the partition, because partition had just taken place. This document is, I think, from 1949. They are, earlier we had a Karachi dealer, but now if we have to send it, we have to apply for an export license. Now, if we are sending him all the products, it has to carry the Made in India label, because suddenly that is a foreign country for us. And this is just one line, but it talks a lot about that era. And one of these documents are now actually also in the Partition Museum at Amritsar. We also had other documents, like the second document dated 31st December 1970 that you see here is again a routine kind of a circular, which says that now from this year, we will be changing our financial year from calendar year to fiscal year. Now, this actually, started really making us think that why suddenly there is a change in this. And then we realized that in late 60s, Godrej had started hiring management trainees from institutions like Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, that had come up in 60s. And suddenly there was a complete change in the outlook. Company wanted to be now, moving from traditionally managed company to the professionally managed company. So the whole professionalism started coming in around 70s. And then you can see from these little circulars, the impact that those kind of changes that were like taking place in that time were having on the Godrej's processes and the procedures. So everything, that Godrej was doing, every change we had to document, every decision that was taken, we had to document. And then this was the collection that was giving us all the interesting tidbits of that particular period. And then our star product was, of course, that you can see in the middle was the ballot boxes that again we found in Lal Bagh. It was just lying on one table, and we suddenly like saw it, and we thought that this looks interesting. Let's have a look at it. And then it was kind of a eureka moment for us, because this was the ballot box made for the first election of independent India. And we got two pieces from there, and now they are like a proud object in one of our permanent exhibition at Vikhroli. Then we also got a lot of circulars about introduction of different products, drawings of different products, improvements made to the designs of the products. So this was quite a amazing journey of like recovering these documents, discovering new things, and we could now assign dates to certain products. So that's why these documents are really very important. But then we also realize that this is only about the past, but what we have to do about the records that are still there with the businesses. And we had almost 16 businesses, and how actually the small archives team are going to tackle that. So in the first year, we thought, let's concentrate only on one business, which is the youngest business. And that was the Godrej Aerospace. And it was just 30 years old then in 2006. So we thought everything would be there. And this was also, again, an interesting, a milestone in history, because Godrej Aerospace had started working with ISRO, and a lot of technologies were being indigenously manufactured. So we thought this is an interesting history. Let's look at it, and let's see whether we have these kind of records available. So what we did was we did a survey. Now there is, in archival science, we usually refer to this records cycle. So we say that, when the records are created and they are in usage, they are considered to be the current records which are being used. And then once the projects are over, businesses or any organization keeps it only for their reference, then the records enter into the second stage of their life, which is a semi-current records. And then there is a time when they want to weed out, they want to destroy those records, they no more require it. Then that's the time when archives comes in, which is a non-current records. But then we also realize that only if we rely on the non-current records, we might be losing out on a lot of future history. So even we should look at the current records as well, that what kind of records that this institution or organization really creates. And whenever I'm talking about businesses, it can be applicable to any other institutions. Only, in other institutions, it can be the departments. They might have the different kinds of records. So here at the Godrej Aerospace, which was then known as Precision Components and Systems, we thought that let's, see that what kind of records are created, because archivists should know that what kind of records business creates. And that was the exercise that we did at this. And then we thought that let's have three different record rooms that they had. One was dealing with the current records, where they were keeping all the drawings that they needed for manufacturing the product. Then sales and marketing department had some of the semi-current records of the project that were over, but they were keeping it. And the quality control had already some of the records that they have marked for, they wanted to weed them out and discard them. So we thought, these are the three locations where we should just study what kind of records we can actually keep for the archives. And then accordingly, we can design a template for other businesses, that how they can transfer the records and what kind of records they should transfer. And we actually went through, this was again a 3-month project. We went through, there were 2 locations, plant 8 and plant 16 was dealing with manufacturing. Plant 8 was dealing with more sales and marketing kind of records. And what we discovered was amazing. Almost 700 plus files we had discovered. There were a lot of albums, a lot of films that they had done, capturing the manufacturing at Godrej. They were, of course, not professionally done, but they had, but those kind of evidences were there that, how the manufacturing was then. And we actually found amazing collection in this records. And one was, this letter that Naval Godrej was writing to Professor U.R. Rao of ISRO, who was the chairman then, saying that, requesting him to visit the Godrej campus. And then U.R. Rao also, invited Naval Godrej to visit Mahendragiri facility of ISRO. And then that's how the whole relationship started with ISRO. And today, of course, Godrej is manufacturing Vikas engines cryogenic engines for ISRO's SLVs, that is satellite launching vehicles. And we actually found the first logbook, the logbooks of the first Vikas engine that we, Godrej made for ISRO. And it was amazing to see the drawings of Vikas engine, the Viking engine that were received from ISRO, and then also the facilities and the technologies that Godrej indigenously manufactured for ISRO, including the expander, including the rotary vacuum brazing facility, which not many countries have even in the world. And we also found ISRO's annual reports, congratulating and complimenting Godrej's contribution to the whole space program. And so that was really amazing. And minutes of meetings were also there, which actually spoke about why certain decisions were taken. And so this was an amazing exercise for us, because we now understood what kind of records would be there with the businesses, the technological records, the manufacturing related records. And that really helped us in a way to form our policy as well. But around this time, we also realized, because we found these documents regarding the expander technology. But fortunately, somebody told us that Mr. Datar, who used to head the plant and who actually developed this technology here at Godrej, is still around. And then we interviewed him, and you can see even Abdul Kalam with Mr. Datar here, because Abdul Kalam was with DRDL then, and he had come to accept the delivery of the products that we made for DRDL. And Mr. Datar actually really narrated this wonderful incident of how actually they ended up manufacturing expander indigenously. And he said that, ISRO wanted to actually get it from US, but that technology was very expensive. So they discussed with Godrej, and Datar said, why don't we look at it? We'll try and study this technology. Then they actually, went to US, they studied that technology. They came back and said this can be easily done, indigenously. And they developed this expander in 1/5 of the cost that US was offering this technology for. Now, these are the experiences that go missing in the document. So archivists also have to try and see that from the different sources of information. So one shouldn't just rely on the documents and the photographs, which are like tangible, but also these intangible kind of memories that are there with people that would actually go away if these people are no more around. And therefore these experiences, because decisions you might find in a document, but what really went into like executing these decisions, what really were the challenges that they had faced, that only can come if we are interviewing these people and if we are capturing these experiences. And therefore we also developed alongside these record surveys also a program for the oral histories. And today we have 300 plus oral histories. So we started with the retired employees, but then eventually we thought that it is very much necessary to manage this intangible knowledge, and therefore it should be a regular kind of a thing. So whoever now completes 25 years in the organization, we try and interview them. So it's almost every week one interview is what we have now actually planned for. So now, of course, we have 300 plus interviews, but these are really amazing stories. And it's not just the employees, but also like a complete ecosystem we are trying to capture. And one of this example is, one such very interesting oral history we did was with PM Devdar, who had actually joined, and in 70s, he was assigned a task of a computer department when computers were really not very known. There was no concept of personal computers then. And suddenly these computers were introduced in Godrej, and they were assigned the task of actually taking the data. Earlier the salaries and the leaves were maintained manually. So now they had introduced this whole computerization of this kind of a data. And he then explained to us, what was their reaction to that, how that computer was. So this was actually in collaboration with ICL company. So we had got these ICL computers at that point in time. And he actually, said interesting things like, the memory was just 8K. Means today we can't even like imagine about 8K. And he said, only 32 kbytes could be actually, we could preserve on, certain tapes, the magnetic tapes that they were handling. And these were really amazing. He spoke about the programming languages then that they used, and the whole response that employees, gave, and the impact that this kind of a computerization had on the Godrej processes. So he also told us about the difficulties in the earlier days, because everybody was new to this kind of a technology. So everybody was struggling, but eventually they actually saw that how, this is going to be the future for them as well. And we actually have this wonderful collection of photographs from our Mr. Bedi collection, who was the industrial photographer who documented Godrej in 1970s. So oral histories really become very important for us to understand the human relationships, the working cultures of the company, hierarchies within the organizations, how the changes impact the employees or even the society in general. So that's actually, the oral histories are quite a complementary kind of a thing to the other archiving that we are doing at the organization. And then we have actually different kinds of stories that started coming in. So we interview the, mechanic, the typewriter mechanic, and he gave us this little ID card that you can see on the top. We also interviewed the first women employee of Delhi branch, who joined as a telephone operator and later rose to become a store chief at Delhi branch, Mani Thakur, and she gave us this interesting photograph of hers. And she spoke about, because being the first lady, there were no rules for the maternity leave, and then how she actually inquired with the, labor department, and then she conveyed that, and then how the maternity leave came into place for her. So, these are very interesting kind of tidbits which would have been missed otherwise because they are not recorded in files. And then there are also a few engineers, like the diary that you see at the center is given to us by one of the plant manager who was sent to Web Optima in Germany to understand the manufacture of the typewriter. And this was in collaboration because the third model was manufactured in collaboration with Web Optima. So he had gone there. There were no technical documents shared. So he used to actually make note of every observation that he would make. And we have such 3 diaries with us. And he was, I think, a really great draftsman and beautiful handwriting. So these diaries become really precious from understanding the product history. So from engineering, from the engineering story of a product, if these products once go to the customers, then even the customers has a story to tell. So the cupboard that you see on the right was actually purchased in 30s, and it was a wedding gift. And one family in Pune, Tamhane, they actually gave us this cupboard that was given to their, I think, Mr. Tamhane's mother. And so this was actually a wedding gift to her. And this was submerged in one of the Pune floods in 60s when the Panshet Dharan actually broke down and the whole city was underwater. At that time, and still it is intact, which is quite an amazing thing to look at. And this cupboard, just before the pandemic came to us, Mr. Thamane is no more, who used to tell us these stories. And we actually now have a handwritten story about this cupboard from them. We also have got a lot of refrigerators. There is even people who are even still using the first model that we manufactured in 58. So there we actually met one of the employees in one of the customers in Bandra who is still using that 1958 model, which is quite an amazing story. But of course, he's yet to give us that model. But then there are a lot of people, like here you can see the couple with the refrigerator, Mr. and Mrs. Weingankar. And this refrigerator was bought in 1960s and by his father, who was a doctor. And he used to use this refrigerator for the medicines. And now how interesting this is, because the refrigerator was, could be used for the medicines, but it was also used for the personal, of course, the storage of the vegetables and everything. And now today, during the pandemic, when Godrej is manufacturing, the refrigerators for storing the vaccine, I think it has come, it's a complete circle kind of a thing for a story. So that kind of a continuity, I think, you can see from these stories. And so he told us that how strict his father was, because there used to be a lock on the refrigerator and kids were not allowed to play with the refrigerator. So these are very human stories. And I think human stories is something that archives should actually proactively collect, because that actually will then become, the social story, and the social context for the products as well. And then we have these, down below, you can see the Navganis, and this is a wonderful story. Unfortunately, we have no records on them. So only through oral histories, we tried and capture their stories. Now, Navganis are basically the loaders who, they are basically the movers for our products. And even the heavy products, they actually just shift, using very simple things like ropes. But their stories, I think, we tried and capture, and we tried to showcase them in one of our exhibitions as well. So basically, when you're talking about an institution or an organization, you have to look at the complete ecosystem of it. So for us in business, it is the product history, it is the process history, it is also people's history, and how they are seeing the products, and how products are impacting them, how the manufacturing is impacting them, how the changes in the process is impacting them. So this kind of a relationship, I think an archivist has to keep exploring. And one also has to like look at, archives, because it's not just a collection. Nowadays people use it like a verb, that I'm archiving this, even though they are just collecting it. But archiving is quite a larger process, where you are not just collecting, but you are selecting it consciously, and at every stage of the record life cycle, then you're processing it, you're cataloging it, because accessibility is also very important. And therefore archive policy, archivists should proactively work on, and they shouldn't wait for the institutions to develop them for it. And I think archivists should help the institutions to develop an archive policy where these kind of questions needs to be answered, that what are you narrating, what is the scope and the extent of the records, what you are narrating it for, how it is going to be accessed by researchers or by the outsiders. You have to also define few things about the ownership of the records, and how you're going to like make the information accessible on the basis of its confidentiality, whether what can go on a public pedestal. You also have to see that how individuals and institutions have to negotiate when they are maybe like donating certain things to you. So all the transfer forms, donation forms, all those legal things also need to be taken care of. So archives actually becomes all these things, and that archive policy needs to cover that too. And then even in our archive policy, therefore we actually listed out what kind of records that we would be preserving at the business archive. So but these are just the pointers for the businesses, so that they understand that what kind of records to be transferred to the archives on a regular basis. And we are also trying to also keep track of current records as well. And again, the other challenge is also how to catalog, because sometimes cataloging softwares are very expensive. For museums, they already have the collection software, so they can actually extend these softwares to even like keep their archival data. But certain institutions may not have funds. So there is no harm in using Excel, because Excel data can be later transferred on any kind of a software, data management software. And therefore, I think Excel sheets are also perfectly work well to begin with, if there are no funds. So this is the kind of a software that we use for our data management. So we have to also prepare a lot of data sets for each and every type of records. So that also archivists need to actually think about a lot, because the data is going to mean, if you ask me what is the core activity of the archives, I would definitely say cataloging, because collection, because that's actually the connection between the collection and the access, the researchers. So unless and until you have the catalog in place, you cannot even like plan your activities like conservation, or you cannot even plan activities like your digitization. And there is also again challenges in digitization itself, because there is this huge idea about that let's digitize everything. Every institution will ask the archives or anyone there, just digitize everything so that it can be accessible. But it's not really that simple. It's not really preserved, because digital records are actually susceptible to a lot of changes, because digital technology is changing every day. Our investments into server are really quite expensive. So one has to really plan out digitization every year. We also like categorize, we prioritize our records. because it is very expensive affair. And then there are no there are a lot of problems because there are no standards available for the digitization as far as the archiving world is concerned. And therefore, so we also had like our own standards, we follow certain rules, and it is a slow process, because there are a lot of agencies around which and these are actually the problems, and basically related to the outsourcing of digitization services. There are a lot of agencies which offer you digital services, and they will tell you that, okay, 300 documents in one day. Then you have to like just think that it is not going to be the archival standard digitization, because archival standard digitization will not happen like 300 a day, because it will be only 10 to 20, because you have to process it, you have to have certain sizes, you have to scan it at certain resolutions and sizes. So all these parameters also have to be decided. So when one is digitizing, that's again a challenging thing, especially for the archives. And we have to keep constantly thinking whether we are digitizing for the future. And I think that future always has to be on minds of archives, even though they are dealing with the past, because digital is really like fast changing kind of a world where archivist also has to keep themselves updated with the changes. There are a lot of formats changes, like as I was telling you earlier, VHS player are no more there. And these conversions of from analog to digital, that takes a lot of time, a lot of expensive things. Even if you're like, trying to scan the films now, it is quite expensive if you go to any, studios to do that. And then again, the bond digital material, because there is no procedure whereby we can actually keep track of this bond digital material, which is we are exchanging on emails. And as I was mentioning earlier, we might be going through a digital dark age soon if we are not consciously having a plan for the archiving of emails, archiving of our digital documents that we are sharing. So I think we also need to address that challenge very soon. And then we also need to find out that memory is not just the storage of data. You can't just like keep the storage and then just like the archivists sometimes feel comfortable with only records. But I think now the role of the archivist needs to change. They have to be more proactive, they have to be more people friendly. Because again, Mr. Goraksharak, I would like to quote, because he used to tell me that if people are not coming to the museum should go to people. And I think that's something which I have also tried applying in the archives field, because you have to constantly think about different ways of creatively engaging with the different communities around you, because archives is for them. Archives is not just for the archives and for the internal team, but it is for people who should come and explore and find meanings, discover new meanings in the same records. And this constant search of meaning is what I think archives should be all about. So nowadays, I always think that, archivists should now take responsibility as a knowledge provider themselves. So we also have like started the research fellowship so that, researchers can come and use the records. Unless and until we create knowledge, collaborate with them, I think, archiving would be really meaningless if we are just sitting on the data and not doing something about it. And therefore, we have invested our selves into even making publications like the typewriter book that we did in 2016, where we tried to capture the Indian narrative of the typewriter. It's not just the Godrej story, it is about the history of typewriter in India. And so there were like a lot of people contributing essays to this, because we didn't want only the company writers or the company historian to talk about this. We wanted different perspectives, different stories and different narratives to come in. We documented the whatever the leftover of the typewriter world is while going across India. And we also tried to present, we did a lot of research. We also tried to present this story in a very interesting and more engaging way. So that people who don't know the typewriters can experience the typewriter world. So with these little things about the carbon paper and different interesting stories about typewriter in films, so to make the story more interesting. And this is the current project that we are working on, again exploring another product. So this is basically what is very important for the archivist, to keep engaging with the content that they have, find new meanings into that and make past more the usable past for the institution, because that is very important for sustaining the archives in any institution. Because if institution feels that, it's the archives is not really like useful for me, your fundings are going to be like really affected. So you have to make this past a usable past. And how you can do that, actually depends on every institution. So we also try to, so we are part of the induction program, whereby the new recruits are given induction in what Godrej history is all about, so that they know what company that they are going to represent when they are going to deal with the customers. And therefore, this is a very important step that the organization took, and they made us like a regular part of their induction program, whereby we orient these new recruits in the Godrej history. We also use it as a brand building tool. Again, you don't have to have the expensive exhibitions if you don't have funds. We actually started with a conference of exhibition, as we call it. We just used to do A4 printouts, A3 printouts, keep it and laid out, and we used to just ask employees to come and see it. Eventually, like a few years back in 2017, we had this amazing space designed by Sarita Sundar. And now it's a permanent exhibition where we do the induction with the new recruits as well. And people also get their clients, get their customers over here. We are also like now collaborating with the designers who are interested in understanding history to reimagine the products or reimagine the spaces on our campus using the history, and historical collection that we have. And then, of course, there is also a community engagement, and I'm really thankful to Prince of, CSMVS for collaborating with us right from the beginning. Like right from 2006, we are collaborating with them for this annual lecture series, because we thought we need to engage with the business historians so that, we can create the users, we can create the audience for business history. And that's also, I think, archivists need to proactively think about how to create users for your archives. And that's annual lecture is something, a step in that direction as well. And we are also trying to engage with the youngsters, the school kids, college kids, so that business history, because that's not something which is being taught in the schools and colleges. Therefore, we wanted to even make them interested in the business history, in conservation practices, and in archiving as such. Thus, actually, if you can make the past a very usable one for the institutions, I think you have won the half the battle, when you're doing that. And now I think I will just conclude with these questions that, we usually have, that, when I said that it is not just the collection, it is also a selection. So it becomes a political act when you're selecting the records for your archives and you're actually discarding certain things. So this is going to be a dilemma for the archivist every time, that, how, one should be doing that, and, how we should see that, multiple narratives are there in the archives, and there is no such bias from, because there will always be an issue for the archivist if that archivist is the insider of the organization. And Helen Samuel was the first archivist who actually referred to George Orwell's 1949 novel, 1984. And she actually brought these issues to forefront, that how archives actually have the power to control the past, because they are selecting the material which can be viewed by the researchers. And therefore, it becomes very difficult when you are talking about collective memory, but you have to have a selective approach, because you can't just keep collecting. But even in that, how you can actually do that is the dilemma that archivists every day experience. And therefore, it is really becomes like, always a discussion that, sometimes you have to choose between whether you are a historian, whether you're a custodian of your, past that you're taking. So sometimes we, historian inside me has to, take a step back and say, no, okay, we are keeping all these things. Sometimes, we can't really, whenever we are doing the exhibitions, we have to also think about the brand image of the company or the organization. So those dilemmas, I think archivist has to tackle in every institution. But then it is like, can anyone be objective? Because I think history is always about the perspectives of different individuals. What one has to do in the archives is to just break the monopoly of the truth and bring in a lot of multiple narratives in your archives. I think that's the duty of the archivist now, that you cannot really, whenever even you're choosing or selecting, you should see to it that there are multiple perspectives are coming in the archives. And therefore I think we should now be away from this box like mentality that archives was often referred as, of like boundaries of collection and control. You need a control over the content through the cataloging, but when you're talking about archiving in general, it has to be more accessible. And it has to be because this is actually one artwork that I had seen in 2015 Venice Biennale, and Ricardo Bray was the artist who had just kept these boxes, and his whole art installation was like opening these boxes slowly, where even the audience started becoming part of that. And that's exactly just like this installation that Ricardo Bray had imagined. I think even archives has to be imagined in this way, because this box might be your content, your control, you have the control over that content. But I think you have to slowly open these walls and bring people in, start engaging with the communities, make it more like multiple narratives coming in into these box, and you can slowly open it. And this is how he had actually opened, and that's what came out of the box while he was opening this installation there. So this was an amazing thing to see. And that's when I realized that even archives, I think, need to break away from their boundaries. They have to open these walls and slowly bring these content in different meaningful ways to different audiences. And that's what I think archivists should keep doing, to make institutional archives like more meaningful for everyone to experience. And therefore archiving is an experience, of unfolding, unraveling, and extending. So you have to like keep knowing, viewing, and listening, reading, and learning from the archives and all the documents that we have. So this is a whole archives experience that I think should be more open and should be more accessible. And on that note, I think I'll just conclude. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer.
And do we have any questions? Ma'am, so we have one question here. So basically, when you started your career like 15 years ago, what do you think? How far the archives has come so far, and what are the opportunities that archives now can offer to young professionals in today's time?
Yeah, so when actually I started as an archivist, as far as the private archives was concerned, or even business archives, there was only one archives as far as the business archives were concerned. So there was just Tata Central Archives in Pune and one in Jamshedpur. And of course, there were RBI archives, and SBI Museum was already there. But yeah, but now actually I think now it's the great time to see a lot of archives are coming up, and there are very small institutions, small projects that are also now interested in looking at the heritage. So some of the institutions might not be right now starting the archives, but they are now bringing books that are like based on their archival collections, or they are actually interpreting history in different interesting ways through exhibitions, or through different projects. But today, I think archiving is quite an exciting thing. There are a lot of agencies who are now helping different institutions, and they are actually, so now there is like Bajaj, Wipro, even HCL, they are now thinking, or Birlas, they are thinking of, having their archives. There are also like archives, like, a beautiful archives in Delhi, which is Al-Qazi, about the theater, and, so, and even NCPA in Mumbai has a lot of interesting collection. So there are now actually, it's a wonderful time to be actually part of any archives and archive journey. So there are opportunities now. Um, so I think the youngsters have to just be open to any kind of possibilities that are coming their way, because you just have to like keep exploring that, what kind of topics that you are interested in. But I would actually suggest that if you want to become an archivist, I think you should love all the topics, may it be science, may it be technology, because archiving is all about, means knowing things and knowing different things. So institution will have different kind of stories. So I think the youngsters should be just open to these possibilities and should be like open to even the idea of exploring different topics and make them more interesting and communicate them. But yeah, means there are actually now many archives around. Even IIM Ahmedabad now has interesting archives. Their institutional archives is being set up. There is also a music and ethnography archives in Delhi again. There are a lot of oral history projects that are taking place all over India. So there are like a lot of movements are being documented. Then there are like even the individual memory projects, that are also like there. So I think it's a very exciting period for archiving, and there are multiple possibilities for the youngsters. They just have to be like
Open to
get themselves
learning.
trained, yeah,
Yeah.
and learn few bits of archiving.
Yeah. Uh, so there's someone who's asking any work you have done differently in hindsight.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this whole experience actually, there were like different things that we had tried. So typewriter book I have already mentioned, and that was a kind of a interesting publication that we brought out, because for the first time actually, there was a product history that was being written. And so earlier actually what used to happen, especially in the businesses would usually prefer publishing books on, say, founders or the company history, but the product history was really not really dealt with. And I think I can say that I really enjoyed doing that, because it was a kind of a different project, and again it wasn't restricted only to the Godrej story. So that actually was quite an exciting thing for us. Or even the Navganis project that we did a few years back, when there were like no records on Afghanis, but then we actually did this really one interesting pop-up exhibitions. So I think, so these are the different things that we kept doing. Or even the artist in residence program that we had started in 2015, where we had actually invited one artist to make sculptures out of the last batch of typewriters that was lying around. So that was, I think, quite an interesting collaboration we had. So yeah, so there are actually many examples, but yeah, but I think, yes, but I think that's how we are trying to look at the archives in different ways and try to find meanings in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. There is also this. It's Shibu Nair who's also asking you your recommended books to understand archiving.
Oh, I think I can then send you the list because there are too many. Yeah, recently actually there was an online publication on archives in different countries, but that is from Business Archives point of view. But that's a recent digital publication. I think share the list with you, Shannon, and then you can forward it to the
Yeah.
audience. Yeah.
Yes. Uh, there is the next question is when approaching a research project, say for a project on modern history, how do you recommend strat- one strategies they are how do you recommend one strategy? Sorry, I can't get this. How do you recommend one strategy if their approach to archive? Broadly speaking, where should one start from? Sorry, can I just repeat the question? When approaching a research project, say for a project on modern history, how do you recommend strategies to approach a strategy for an archives? Broadly speaking, where should one start from?
Oh, I think once you know your topic and you have done your literature review, I think I think that's the very first step for any, I think, research work, that you should know what has already been published on that work. And then I think especially for the modern history, I think archives is the first step for any kind of research work. After, of course, you have done your literature review and you know what exactly you're looking for. So once that's done, when you know what kind of a hypothesis you're working on, I think archives is going to be your first step. And state archives and of course national archives are like quite accessible. And once you know the topic, you can just go there and go through the list that they have. And I think that's, I think, going to be the first step for any research for that matter.
Yeah, and for all those who are asking for the list of books, you can share your email
Yes,
ID.
I think I'll just share. Yeah.
You can share your email ID at CSMVS Mumbai, and we will send you the list by Miss
Yeah.
Pathare. Yeah. So thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and making this evening very interesting and knowledgeable. Like it is, like you spoke about shared history and memories. I think this is one part of it. Like you have shared your entire experience and your journey with different institutions, and especially Godrej Archives. So thank you so much for being with us today, this evening. I also thank our audience for taking out their time and joining with us this evening. Do continue to join us with our CSMVS activities. You can check our CSMVS social media platform. Thank you so much and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, CSMVS.